now. Thank you for joining this webinar. We're very happy to be launching this book that was co-edited by Dejucticia, JHAI, and University of Los Andes. And it's the English version of the book on law, trade, and nutrition labeling, reflections and experiences from Latin America. My name is Juan Carvalho. I'm the Senior Legal Coordinator for the Food and Nutrition Portfolio at the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. I'll be moderating this webinar today. And we're very happy to be presenting this book in English, which is a collective effort of many, many good friends and many amazing authors and contributors. We have some panelists, which include editors and authors from the book, and from multiple countries, as you can see. And we'll be having a roundtable discussion about some of the things that we are sharing in the book. This is some of the logistic information for your reference for today. There's simultaneous translation, so you need to click on the interpretation button and select either English or Spanish. And if there's no need for translation, then you can put off original audio and you'll be hearing to both languages. All attendees online are on mute. If there's any technical issues, please send a message through the chat to Niola. The session is being recorded. I think you probably got that message as you joined. And there's a Q&A function in which we'll be compiling questions for the speakers throughout the webinar. And once we are finished with initial comments and discussions, we'll also have quite some time for those questions. So please send your questions for the panelists. We wanted to start with a quick survey for all attendees because we've been hearing all over that the issue of trade has been very relevant for discussions around public health issues and particularly labeling. And this is basically the reason why we worked on this book. So you can scan the QR code here or go to the Menti website and put this code, and you'll find a survey to respond, which will be seeing soon some of the initial responses. You can see also the link in the chat as well. So we have one of the first answers, which is to convince policymakers. We have seen how sometimes the industry moves the discussions to only trade, and sometimes that influence the willingness to advance on these policies. To ensure health policies withstand trade challenges and protect public health, just to develop strong policies. This is important because it affects the food industry, because it's a usual argument from the industry to align trade and health policies, and for stronger consumer protection. To understand and regulate cross-border food policy issues, to prevent and prepare for legal challenges, to balance with commercial interests. I think these are really great answers, and it shows how relevant it is for our daily advocacy work. And I think and hope that some of the reflections and some of the experiences captured in the book also relate to these responses and these ideas on why trade law is important for public health advocacy work. Okay, thank you. So just to get us started, I'll give the word to Diana, who will share with us the story behind the book, how the idea emerged, and how the experiences were collected. And just in case, Diana is the director of the economic justice line in Dejucticia and the main editor of the book. So thank you, Diana. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Juan, and everyone for being here in this webinar. I'm very happy to share this book with all of you, and of course to tell a little bit of the history and how the idea was born. First thing to say that the idea was born originally in 2020 during the pandemic. Most of the lawyers and advocates working on promote the front of package labeling laws on ultra-processed foods and beverages in Latin America were based in their own countries. And we used to meet once a year in a legal workshop that we used to organize with Global Health Advocacy Incubator, Dejucticia, and the O'Neill Institute. During that first year of the pandemic, we met online to maintain that sense of community, but we felt that this was not enough. And we decided to take advantage of that time of being at home and to do something that we really wanted to do for a long time, which was to reflect on the legal challenges that we faced and share on this process of advocating for labeling laws. And one legal challenge that was very significant for Latin American advocates was this industry argument that front of package labeling laws violated international trade law because, they say, it could be understood as a technical barrier to trade. The argument was challenging, but not because it was a true interpretation within international trade law. It wasn't because the lawyers at that time did not have the expertise in these areas of law. In fact, most of the Latin American lawyers and advocates at that time were people from the human rights side who had some interest and experience in advocating for the right to health and who were slowly moving into the discussion of the right to food and public health prevention policies. So responding to that industry argument required more than human rights arguments. It required actually building an expertise that we did not have at that time. And in order to build that expertise precisely, and together with Professor René Urueña from the Universidad de los Andes, which is a renowned Colombian expert in economic law and who helped us to understand and navigate these arguments within the Colombian coalition, also with Juan Carballo, that you already listened to, which is a senior legal advisor of the Global Health Advocacy Incubator, we decided to join efforts to edit this book. And in December of 2020, we sent out the call for proposals, inviting Latin American advocates to submit their proposals for the book. At that time, we received 13 proposals from more than 6 countries in the Americas and began the editing process. This process included a peer review of each chapter by each of the editors and an online seminar where all authors received verbal feedback. Finally, in September 2022, so it took us more than 1 year and a half, we launched the first edition in Mexico City, taking advantage of the 5th Latin American Workshop on Legal Strategies on Food and Health. After this first Spanish edition, we realized that the challenges and experiences faced by Latin American advocates were actually shared by other advocates around the world. When countries from Africa and Southeast Asia tried to pass similar front-of-package labeling laws, they also encountered similar arguments against these initiatives. We thought that looking at the Latin American experience could provide new insights into how to deal with these arguments. And Juan Carballo, again, was one of the first to come up with the idea that translating this book into English could help amplify the voice of Latin American advocates to the rest of the world. He also helped us to raise the funds necessary to do so. Between November 2023 and September 2024, Morgan Stoffergren, which was the translator hired by Dejucticia, translated and revised all the chapters of the book, which was finally published in December 2024. As I mentioned earlier, the book contains 13 chapters written by 37 authors and is divided into three parts. The first part presents the most theoretical and legal discussions on nutrition labeling and international economic law. The first chapter, for example, introduces and develops the concept of communities of practice in the regulation of front-of-package labeling. It argues that interpretations of the technical barriers to trade agreement or TBT agreement are collectively constructed in an interaction with the states and other social actors that interact with the committee. Another chapter, which is the one from Janela, Lujan, and Juan, explains the understanding of nutritional labels from the perspective of international trade law. It answers questions such as what the WTO's Committee on Technical Barriers to Trade says about food labeling, or whether or not this is a technical barrier to trade, or what is the role of international standards in trade, such as the Codex Alimentarius. Another one, also authored by Diego, who is here, does the same, but from the perspective of Mercosur, and explain the role that Mercosur minimum standards on food labeling play in the discussion of front-of-package labeling laws. A final chapter in that section discusses the relevance of NGOs' participation in the World Trade Organization. So this is the first part, very much more theoretical. The second part discusses the problem of how to balance trade law rules with other legal regimes, such as, for example, human rights law or consumer rights perspective. This is one that we have one chapter for each legal regime. And the third part, which is the largest one, presents the experience of adopted front-of-package labeling laws in 6 Latin American countries. So we have the experience of Mexico, Ecuador, Peru, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay. And each chapter discusses the most common arguments against the laws, as well as the arguments and strategies used by these advocates to defend the relevance of the laws in national parliaments. We really hope that this book can be used with at least 2 purposes. One is that it can be used as an academic tool to consult legal arguments and understand the discussions on front-of-package labeling laws on trade. But we also would like that this book can be used as an advocacy inspiration, a place to look for the history and struggle of how these laws were passed in Latin America and find new ideas on how to continue promoting nutritional labels in their own countries. If we can convince you to read the book, to cite it, to use it in your own work, we will know that all this effort was worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Yana. Thank you. That's a very kind and great intro to the book. Thank you. Following what Diana was mentioning, the first section of the book discusses general legal issues around trade and how it affects or could not affect labeling policies. And we have someone to speak from that section, which is Gianella. Gianella is a legal coordinator at GHAI at CTFK, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. And so I have a couple of questions for you, and I'll be starting with the first one. And once you're done, I'll come back to you for a second one. But could you present the theoretical framework on the relevance of the intersection between labeling and trade in line with the 2 articles you wrote for the book? Where does it come from, and why is it relevant for advocates to get familiar with this issue? Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Gracias. Hola a todos y todas. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I had the opportunity to contribute to 2 chapters of the book, which I co-authored with Lujan Abramo and with you, Juan. So I'm especially grateful for the collaboration, and I'll try to answer the questions with all that we have learned together. So, and just to say that these articles are the result of years of work, as Diana was mentioning, where we have been supporting the implementation of FOPL and across different countries. And at one point, we realized that trade-related arguments were consistently among the most common legal challenges that were raised against FOPL policies. And that pushed us to better understand the trade law dimension, not just to respond reactively, but also to proactively integrate trade considerations into the policy design and also the advocacy process when working on FOPL. So in short, and to reflect the effort to reach these legal, health, and trade perspectives to strengthen FOPL adoption and implementation, where we had, as a result, the two articles that we wrote together. And to answer your question with regards to the theoretical framework, first, and this has been already mentioned, there has been always a tension, or a supposedly a tension, between health and trade. And if we all know that FOPL aims to protect public health by giving the consumers a clear and a visible information about the products, and that these measures have often got complaints in trade forums, especially under the World Trade Agreements, like the Technical Barriers to Trade or TBT agreement, and that this tension lies between public health regulation and trade liberalization commitments. And these have been there have been dilation strategies in this economic fora, right? So arguments related to trade, to investment, to economic implications are presented to delay, water down, or abandon the adoption of many public health policies, such as FOPL. And we have seen these dilation strategies. So what do we need to take into consideration as this theoretical framework, the framework that we really need to know? Well, first, that there is the World Trade Organization has many series of agreements. There are many regional and bilateral agreements that they have been designed to establish a balance between the rights to regulate and the obligations to facilitate trade. So all these agreements have been designed to facilitate the trade. And the members of the World Trade Organization may implement measures and regulations as long as they are not discriminatory, they are not more trade restrictive than necessary, and they achieve a legitimate objective. For example, protect the human health. So when countries implement FOPL measures, when countries are implementing front of package nutrition labeling measures, they need to take into consideration that they are not discriminatory, they are not more trade restrictive than necessary, and that they are achieving a legitimate objective that in this case is to protect the human health. So all these considerations regarding trade need to be taken into consideration, and those are the ones that we've been studying to see, okay, what can we do to take them into consideration, to build on an FOPL that has this into consideration, that protect health and is not violating any of these frameworks. And so our articles show how forums like the WTO TBT committee and also the Mercosur, that I know that we're going to speak more about the Mercosur with the following panelists, have become spaces where labeling is questioned, often under the pressure from the food industry and using these economic arguments. So we really need to understand them. And we have developed some concepts for public health measures in the article where we explained and we said, okay, let's take into consideration which is the policy objective. It needs to be clearly defined. It needs to be tailored to circumstances. It needs to be evidence-based. The measure needs to be shown as a necessary measure, and the evidence needs to show that the measure is necessary to achieve the policy objective. We need to consider also alternatives, consider and document the alternative measures so that we can compile evidence to show why they do not meet policy objective and FOPL does. We need to show that these are not non-discriminatory, and we also need to follow due process and consult all relevant stakeholders. So with all this information, what we wanted to show in the article is that if we know which are the trade arguments, we know how to counter them, and we take them into consideration when we are building FOPL and when we're advocating for the measure, the more we understand the trade angle, the better we can protect and defend strong labeling policies. So that was the objective. I hope I answered the question I might got drive into other angles of it. But we wanted to show that. We wanted to show that it's relevant to advocates to get familiar with the issue, that it's not as complicated as the food industry shows, that we need to take them into consideration, and that when we understand them and we take them into consideration when building the policy, then it's easier to defend them when the food industry comes to say that they are violating an agreement that in reality they are not.
Thank you, Diana. Yes, I think you answered the question. Definitely. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a matter of understanding that it's not simply. Sometimes we feel that the industry present these arguments with the only idea to delay the process, as you were saying, or to basically stop from the public health discussion to continue or to advance. And basically, we can also participate in those discussions, and there are good arguments that support labeling policies and other public health policies that are compliant with trade legal frameworks. And in that line, actually, I wanted to ask you whether you could share some lessons learned from the tobacco experience with regards to trade and tobacco control policies.
Yeah, so in tobacco, we had the tobacco control movement faced very similar challenges, and the tobacco industry has used trade arguments to delay the implementation of many measures, for example, health warnings. And when we were discussing plain packaging initiatives for cigarettes, plain packaging is a measure where you take away all the advertising from the package. So the package is only showing the name of the brand. The health warning is very, very big, and you don't have any type of advertising in the package. So when countries started to adopt plain packaging, there were many trade arguments that were raised against these measures. In particular, one that got to the TBT committee, the WTO, and it became actually a case. When we're speaking about FOPWL and front of package labeling measures in food, there hasn't been a case. There have been concerns raised. In tobacco, we actually had a case. And when we were going through that case, the industry was posing very similar arguments to the ones that are posed against FOPWL. And finally, the WTO decided that plain packaging was based on evidence, it was well justified, and it was complying with trade agreements from the start. And so what lessons can we learn from the tobacco control movement? First, that with tobacco control, we implemented a policy that took away all advertising from the package, and the WTO confirmed that it was trade compliant from the start. So learning from the cases from tobacco, and there have been many other cases. I'm speaking about only one case from Australia, but there have been many different cases and many concerns raised against tobacco products that can be useful for food policy advocacy. So the first is to learn to know about these cases and be legally prepared. So the tobacco industry challenged health laws under trade and also investment treaties. The lesson is we need to design the regulations that are evidence-based, well-justified, and also trade compliant, as you were saying, Juan. We always tend to think that these are only delay strategies. They are not. Sometimes we really need to take into consideration what they are saying so that we're prepared, right? So that we do not delay also the implementation of the policy. And then another lesson that we learned is to use global international frameworks to legitimize the policies. So in tobacco control, we have the FCTC, we have the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control that helped defend strong laws. We can build from there for food. We don't have a binding treaty, but we can use WHO recommendations, human rights obligations, and evidence from global institutions to also give FOPWL legitimacy. And we can also even use the FCTC to defend our laws for food because we're building from the experience. And finally, we can also build cross-sector alliances. In tobacco, legal experts, advocates, and public health actors work together. We need to do the same, a coordinated network that already exists, that understands trade, law, and health. As we did with this book and the many different articles that were written and the many different authors that participated, we built a community that is coordinated, that understands trade, that understands law, that understands public health, and that is documenting all, so that whenever a country is looking forward to implement a policy like this, they have the information, they are working with the academia, we're working all together so that we can show that trade rules shouldn't be used to block these policies that we know that are evidence-based and that help us to protect lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. That was very helpful. And as in many other occasions, we learn from tobacco experience. It's been one of the most developed public health policies. So thank you for that. So we've been with Gianella's participation, we have been focusing on the World Trade Organization, more global arguments and its legal framework, how that impacts and influence and can be used to actually support public health policies, and particularly around labeling policies. We've been seeing that some of these trade-related arguments have been used also as they relate to more regional organizations. And we've been seeing that in the Caribbean, in Africa, and also in South America. So we wanted to discuss one of the situation and cases that is present also and expressed in the book, which is around how the industry was using Mercosur, which is a regional trade organization from South America, and how the industry had used that organization and that trade forum to delay some of the policy advancements, both in Uruguay and Brazil. It was also used in Argentina, actually, but we wanted to first focus on Uruguay. And for that, I'll be passing the word to Diego. Diego is the president of OMIS and the coordinator of the NCD Alliance in Uruguay. And basically, I'd like to answer, Diego, if you could share how was the experience of the use of the Mercosur as an argument, why the industry seek to bring these discussions to commercial forums such as the Mercosur, and what was the main arguments that they used for that. I'll have another potential follow-up question for you, Diego, but once you're over, I'll get to the second one. Thank you.
Bueno, voy a hablar en español. Agradecerles a ustedes por la invitación. Y destacar también que seguramente están presentes hoy acá el equipo con el que construimos o elaboramos la parte que colaboramos en el libro, que en realidad refleja, hay mucho más para reflejar de lo que fue ese proceso, en concreto lo que fue Mercosur.
What happened in relation to Mercosur,
Lo que fue Mercosur,
the experience.
Confirmando idioma.
I'm just checking that I'm speaking
Uruguay ya había definido la política de etiquetado frontal.
We had defined the FOPL based on scientific evidence. It had been adapted as far as PAHO recommendations to move towards what they had established. But there was industry interference taking place back then, and also when we wanted to start implementing it. They had a lot of influence within the government at that point. Actually, Uruguay defined FOPL, perhaps not the best, but something that we felt that, considering what you find around the world and in our region, is good. But this was part of the outcome of the activism by civil society during different discussions when actually the industry realized that in Uruguay, they were not going to modify the regulation as they wished to. What they tried to do was to discuss it at the level of Mercosur, and it was in fact discussed there. The thing is that there were no agreements between the governments. There were several situations taking place within Mercosur. Lais, who will be joining me afterwards, sharing their experience in Brazil. They have also participated in the sphere of Mercosur as well. Mercosur experienced situations, for instance, a country from one meeting to the other changed its stand regarding the nutrient profile to declare the excess of products by the industry. In the case of Uruguay, since they were unable to modify what they hoped to modify, what happened was that in the decree that defined FOPL at the end, it was mentioned that Uruguay had to adapt to Mercosur if Mercosur made a decision in this regard. In fact, this is a huge weakness because we knew that Mercosur was the privileged sphere for the industry. Civil society participated as observer. And it was a forum where they could have an influence and also from there to convey this, what had to be met to other countries. Mercosur already had a resolution on nutritional labeling, but in reality, the nutritional labeling evidence had shown that it was insufficient. The interpretation, people did not understand it. Not everyone read the labels. This is why, and this is part of this whole regional movement. This led to a labeling that could be interpreted in plain sight when there was an excess of nutrients within a product. In fact, the process that took place in Uruguay was very important. We heard Janela regarding tobacco. There are a lot of lessons learned from the tobacco experience. We had a case in Uruguay with Philip Morris. That's another lesson learned regarding what Janela mentioned. Also about international trade agreements. But Uruguay, despite all of this and the lesson learned, what they did in the process of preparing FOPL was to consult the WTO to see if this was a hurdle for trade. And in fact, what WTO said was that it was no barrier, that FOPL was not a barrier to trade. Despite this, the industry continued to say this, that they said Uruguay is very much dependent on the market internally in this region. And they said, well, the first argument, and I have also seen it in other regions and in other countries where they're hoping to implement this. We have to harmonize. Everyone has to have the same thing. The CEO of PepsiCo came to Uruguay recently when we were holding this discussion to say that, yes, of course, that there should be harmonization amongst all of the countries so that they all have the same thing. The reply I always give to this, I said, hopefully, yes, but harmonize based on the PAHO recommendations. If the countries have no harmonization now regarding FOPL, it's because of the influence of industries within governments. If not, we would be harmonized with what PAHO has said. Also, the other argument regarding trade was, well, when we import and export, then this becomes difficult regarding packaging. We will have to generate two different packages. That's an additional cost. And in that case, Uruguay sorted this out by saying that we could include stickers that in the initial printing, it didn't have to be included. So if we wanted to export something without the hexagonal labels, that was the other possibility. But even when the product was imported, the sticker could be placed on the product. Afterwards, after all of this sorted out that discussion. But afterwards, Argentina moved forward towards FOPL. They managed to define something that was much better than Uruguay, but also it became a law. Argentina. And because of the market within Mercosur, the packages from Argentina came to Uruguay. And what happened was that Uruguay demanded placing a sticker on the octagons that did not belong to Uruguay. In that case, in Argentina was much more stringent regarding excess of nutrients. This is what happened. There was an excess of something, and here it failed to meet the regulations, so they were covered. This is what happened somewhat. It was resolved, and all of the arguments raised by the industry were addressed. What the industry said, they said that it was going to increase the prices of products. And once they said, yes, but when you have special prices during Christmas or special occasions, you not only change the label, but you also sell them at lower prices. And also, there's a difference of labels from one country to the other. When you go to another country, you have to meet the rules of the destination country. Not only in the case of FOPL, there's a lot of information that has to be put on the packages that has to be met in the destination country. So we don't understand the story behind the argument used by the industry. Of course, we know that the problem is strictly FOPL, which is nuisance for them. This in regards to Mercosur, but I can elaborate on this regarding lessons learned and the experiences and regard in this process and what can be rescued in the tobacco control movement as well.
Gracias, Diego, por la respuesta.
Thank
por
you
las
very
reflexiones.
much, Diego, for your reflections and for
Ahí,
your
bueno, un poco para
answer.
continuar en esta línea,
To
hay un
continue
caso
along
judicial
these
en
same
Uruguay
lines, there's a legal case
que
in
fue
Uruguay,
uno de los pocos que, bueno, que
one of the few
trata justamente el
that
argumento del
deals in
Mercosur
fact with the argument
tribunal lo descarta
of
y dice, bueno,
Mercosur, ruled out by the
esta
court, saying
política no
that
cumple
this
con la normativa
policy is not
Mercosur.
failing to comply with the
Un poco
Mercosur
preguntarte de ese caso,
regulation.
cómo se
I
usó
wanted
para
to
la
ask you
estrategia de
about this case. How
incidencia,
was
cómo
this
se
used for the
fortalecía la
advocacy
campaña
strategy? How was the campaign
localmente para apoyar y
strengthened at a local
para
level to support
darle
and
un
to
poco más de
give
energía
a
a la
bit more
importancia de
energy
que el propio Estado, el propio
to the
gobierno avance con
importance
una
of the
política
government and the state moving
protectora sin depender
forward
de un recetazo
with
internacional que, como vos
measures
explicaste, tiene
protecting
otro
this,
foco, otro perfil.
and not internationally, which has a different focus and approach. I think that legal actions by the industry and by civil society, of course, end up influencing the political decisions. In fact, since this case was quite the opposite, made the position much more robust internally. We can even mention sovereignty of states in this case. I also say this, Uruguay or any of our countries, I don't think we are not waiting to define policies based on what Argentina tells me that I have to do or what Brazil tells me that I have to do. I think that each country is sovereign. And this is how our constitutions have been drafted, to make decisions. Also, going back to the tobacco experience, what was established in the decision in the Philip Morris versus Uruguay case, that was that the countries were sovereign and that the health of the population had to be protected, taking the measures that were necessary beyond commercial or trade agreements and beyond the markets. In this case, Mercosur. So these decisions against the arguments of the industry and in favor of what we were defending in Uruguay allowed us to have a firm position internally. This was not the only case that the industry lost, because when Uruguay modified the decree, even the industry, which had requested such modifications, conducted some other legal actions, and they lost as well. And this weakened the position of the industry. It is not always the case, but it is clear that when these legal cases take place, if the industry loses, at the end of the day, it strengthens initial actions in the countries. In some, this leads to emphasizing the fact that states are sovereign, being in making decisions to protect the health of their populations.
Gracias, Diego. Thank you.
Thank you
so
very
much
much,
for
Diego.
those interactions. We'll be able to hear more from Diego in the open Q&A. So if there are further questions on his experience, please continue to use the Q&A button. And now we'll continue a little bit in the Mercosur issue, but with a different perspective, which is we've been saying that this space is very much focused on economic and trade arguments. And we have the experience from IDECI, and we'll be hearing from Lais, who's the coordinator of the Healthy and Sustainable Food Program at IDECI. And they have some experience in which they've been pushing for stronger and more open participatory mechanisms in Mercosur, and how that could bring other arguments to that specific space. So I was wondering whether you could share with us a little bit of that experience, Lais.
Hi, can you hear me well? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm here representing 6 other authors of the Brazilian chapter. So I thank you in the name of them too. And I just wanted to highlight the importance to document the regulatory processes, especially to support other countries that are going through similar processes. So this initiative is so important. In regards to your question, Juan. In Mercosur, we have the representation. In Brazil, we have the representation of the National Health Surveillance Agency, that is Anvisa. We call it Anvisa. So Anvisa represents Brazil in the food labeling discussions in the bloc. And we have the only country coordinator from Anvisa related to the health sector, while the other countries, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina, are represented by sectors related to commerce and economy. Of course, this does not mean that we are free from the industry interference during these discussions. And regarding the participation of the civil society, especially IDEC as a civil society organization, Anvisa organized periodical online meetings with the participation of interested actors from civil society, academia, and the industry as well. So they invite the industry as well. The aim of this is to gather information and evidence, to discuss technical aspects of the regulations, and to decide Brazil's positioning for each theme that is being discussed. In Mercosur, we are participating in the front of package nutrition labeling discussions, general food labeling, and nutrition food labeling discussions. And I'm talking about this because in Brazil, we have a regulation that connects the front of package with the nutrition food labeling discussion. The front of package labeling is inside this regulation. Even so, in Mercosur, these discussions are separately. Unfortunately, the representation of the industry in this Anvisa's meetings is much higher than the other representatives from academia and from civil society. And regarding our work, just one disclaimer that is important. The front of package nutrition labeling discussion in Mercosur, we did not reach agreement among the countries, and it was moved to the coordinators to decide. This means that the decision now will be political. And at the same time, the general nutrition food labeling discussions is still in the countries to discuss, but with technical discussions. But it's been 12 years of discussions of these two regulations, so we are following this for many years. And our work in the civil society is based in the active participation in the internal discussions promoted by Anvisa, by sharing national and international scientific evidence without conflicts of interest, and technical aspects discussed previously within the Brazilian Research Observatory in Food Labeling. This is an initiative that IDEC is coordinating, and the observatory is composed of many researchers and advocates of the country. So we discuss it there, and we can bring these discussions via IDEC to the discussions in Mercosur. Besides that, we follow Mercosur work through advocacy meetings with Anvisa's technical team and the directors, that is who can make the political decisions. In Brazil, in the Brazilian regulation, it is foreseen that with the harmonization in Mercosur, before the regulation going into force entirely, the resolution would be reviewed. So it didn't happen yet, but it's foreseen in the regulation.
Thank you, Lais. Thank you very much. So we have one other question. I think you touched a little bit on this, on how these efforts influence decision-making processes in Mercosur, showing that public health interests and reasons and arguments were properly taken into account. So you touched on that in your questions, but just in case you want to deepen a little bit.
Yes, of course, Juan. During the discussions on the nutrition food labeling, which includes the front of package labeling, as I said, here in Brazil, we developed a project together with FIC Argentina, that is an NGO from Argentina, to provide evidence in order to promote effective mandatory front of package labeling systems in both countries, and to support policy discussions in the other Mercosur countries. And this project was based in the industry argument, as we said before, that the regulation of front of package nutrition labeling should follow the timing of the Mercosur discussions. And as a result, we found three main things here. That international trade rules recognize the power of the states to legislate and adopt the actions that may deem necessary to protect access to truthful information by consumers and the health and lives of citizens, even when such norms could represent a barrier or impediment to the harmonization of norms that favor international trade, as Diego already said. Both Argentinian and Brazilian states have the power to establish food labeling and packaging provisions without the need for prior approval under the scope of Mercosur, and both countries have already used their powers on distinct occasions by setting visual warnings, as in the case of the triangle indicating the presence of genetically modified organisms in Brazil, and of the warning on products with wheat, oat, barley, and rye in Argentina. So these cases were used to support this argument too. And last, the front of package nutrition labeling is not only a measure to protect public health, but it is also directly linked to the consumer's rights to obtain, and thus the state's duty to ensure access to correct and accurate information, and to the prohibition of misleading advertising, which is also established by national laws. Besides that, by exchanging information and discussing with civil society and academia representatives from the Mercosur countries, Argentinian partners managed to start participating in the bloc meetings as observers. Before that, only industry representatives were included in these discussions. And finally, as I said before, many studies were developed by advocates and researchers without conflict of interest in the country to support the front of package nutrition labeling discussions in the country and in the Mercosur. So it was used both in the internal discussions to approve the regulation in Brazil that happened in 2020, and in Mercosur that is still ongoing, the nutrition and general labeling discussions and the front of package until it went to the coordinators. Thank you.
Thank you, Lais. Thank you very much. So we have quite some time for questions and answers. We have already received a few questions from participants. I think we'll be trying to respond to some of those from the different panelists. So if I can ask the speakers to turn on their cameras, and I think this will be a collective part of the webinar, as we'll be responding to some of those. I think the first one can go to you, Diana, which is, what recommendations would you provide to advocates in other regions to replicate these efforts?
Thank you, Juan. Well, how to replicate this? I will speak just from the experience. That I don't think there is something like a book that describes of the perfect recipe to do this, but in my experience, something that really worked. The first thing was to work in collaboration with experts, someone that really knows in deep trade law, someone that is well knowledgeable about this type of content, of legal content, and who can explain to you exactly, or who can actually translate all of these technicalities into something that is that can be used by the organization. And the second one is trusting the capability of each organization to really translate these technicalities, all of these discussions, into their own languages, using any type of tool that they may consider. So, for example, in our case was writing a book, but it could be actually something else. So, for example, develop some communication strategies, or maybe doing some videos to translate all of these arguments to the local communities, etc. The third one is probably in our case, we decide, or we felt confident in carry out this book or to write, to edit this book, because we in Dejucticia are a research institution. So we had experience in writing books, in editing collections, and we have a strong team of people working in publications who were actually helping us in doing the design of the book, for example, or correcting the Spanish version, the English version, translated it into English. So if you really want to go into the path of writing a book, then obviously you need a team of people working and knowing how to publish books. And finally, and this is probably my best learning from the process, is that you really need to trust and create an environment of collaboration. In our case, I think it was very important that we, as an advocate, we used to meet once a year, and now every 2 years. But we used to meet in a legal workshop that we organized with TFK, O'Neill Institute, and also Global Health Advocacy Incubator. And that legal workshop helped us to develop that sense of community, trust, to really know each other and to say, hey, we really can do this together. We trust that there is another person who can really give us feedback, who can really put everything together and try to make this to make sense. And that sense of trust and community, I think that it was the key and most fundamental issue to go through all the projects since the very beginning to the end.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you very much. So we have another question, and I think maybe Lais, you can respond this one. What proactive advocacy strategies could help safeguard public health goals in safeguarding and promoting evidence-based FOPL?
Yes, Juan, thank you. It's a bigger question, but related to this issue, I think talking about other countries and other economic blocs, it's very, very important to understand the internal processes of these economic blocs and the way to participate in these discussions. Try to understand how the country is included in these discussions, if there is internal discussion before to decide a positioning, as I said, related to Anvisa, for example. So this is important, even if only the country and the civil society organizations can participate as observers, because this is the way that we can monitor the industry interference, and it can be used as a way to plan strategically next steps with partners and with the regulatory bodies as well. And some other thing that I think it's important in the countries especially, and that we did during the entire process with Anvisa, was to demand predictability of the regulatory process, to know what are the next steps, what to expect of the regulatory process, for us to be prepared with evidence, with whatever we need to be, to demand the publication of the agendas of the teams of the regulatory body and of Mercosur and everything inside the regulatory process. And some other thing that we did, it's not easy, but with the social participation predicted in Anvisa, we could do that, is to demand the balanced participation of civil society, academia, government, and industry representatives. Of course, if we can exclude the industry of the technical discussions and technical decisions, it would be the best. But in the case of Brazil, for example, we have this in regulation. So Anvisa invites everyone that is interested in the subject that is being discussed. So at least we need to have the balanced participation. It's not easy because it demands time, it demands people, it demands sometimes resources, financial resources to go to the meetings. But this is something that we tried to stimulate the social participation with the partners from the civil society and academia as well.
Thank you, Lais. Thank you very much. So we have another question, which is many of the Latin American countries effectively passed the FOPL laws or regulatory measures. What type of legal challenges faced by these countries related to design of FOPL in the context of global trade, viewing policy passing process and enforcement of the policy? How these challenges were addressed? So basically challenges related to FOPL labeling as they relate to trade arguments, both in the approval and implementation of the policies. I think, Diane, you can probably respond to that one.
Yes, thank you. And I think this is a really important question because I think it's important to clarify that there has not been any legal challenge at WTO against any of the front of package warning labeling laws. So we haven't received any legal challenge that came into a dispute as we have had with tobacco cases, for example. And I think this is very important to clarify, because what has happened was that there have been concerns that have been raised against FOPL measures, but not a legal challenge, a dispute, litigation at the WTO. So just to clarify that, because the industry many times in our countries and many Latin American countries, as the question said, have approved FOPL, like Chile, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, many different countries have approved it. And during the process, the industry would say, I'm going to litigate this at WTO. I'm going to file a lawsuit against you because you are not complying with WTO. This has happened already in Chile, for example. And they would always say that, but when we were looking at this, there was no legal challenge, there were concerns. These are diplomatic sessions where the countries are met at the WTO, and a country might say, I'm concerned about this measure. What Uruguay can respond to that? And Uruguay would respond, oh, we did this because we were based in evidence, blah, blah, blah. But it was not that there was a dispute like it happened with tobacco. And as I was saying in previously with plain packaging, there were specific countries that litigate plain packaging for tobacco against Australia, but this has not happened for FOPL. Sorry that I delayed a little bit in explaining that, but I think that is very important to clarify that there were no legal challenges. But yes, we had these concerns that were raised. And I think that this is important because if you're in a country and you're about to adopt it and the industry says, oh, we filed a lawsuit at the WTO because of this is not true. We can send information to show that they have only been concerns. And I don't know if you want to add something else, Juan, with your expertise to clarify this.
Thank you, Diane. I think you covered the question, so thanks for that. I think it's important just to stress what you were saying, that there has not been formal cases, but just discussions, and in all of those discussions, governments that were proposing the FOPL policies responded based with evidence and very strongly responded to some of those concerns. So I think that's important in terms of how we deal with these threats, as you were also saying in your comments, Diane. I'll respond to a very quick question just came up on how from Nidia on how the advocates or the government in Uruguay responded to the argument of not harmonizing with Mercosur, which I think is relevant as this could apply to other regional trade blocs. Basically, and I think Uruguay is an interesting case because we have the judicial case, which we don't have many judicial cases discussing these issues. And just to make it shortly before going to another question, basically the court found that there was no violation and no need to harmonize every single aspect of the legislation. So there were some common issues that they had agreed that needed to be harmonized, but not every single aspect of that. And of course, there were domestic obligations that were based on the Constitution to protect the right to health and to protect the right to food that allowed governments to advance in policies that were protective of their health as they saw fit based on the evidence that they had available. So that's what Uruguay did. And that's reflected in this case in which the industry was actually arguing that the FOPL policy in Uruguay was not compliant with Mercosur. So the court found that there was no need to harmonize every single aspect of it in a short answer. There's another question that I think it's good for Diego. And of course, you want to say something more about this comment that I did for Uruguay, Diego. But I think that many of us who know Diego know that he's a very activist, both in physical spaces, in-person meetings, but also in digital spaces. So there's a question on how can CSOs leverage digital spaces, such as the World Trade Organization notification platform and social media, to disseminate information and mobilize civil society around the issue of FOPL. So any comments on that, Diego?
Sí, gracias, Juan. Me
Yes,
parece que
of course. Thank you so much, Juan. I think that in our world today, digital platforms and social media are of the utmost importance. People are receiving a lot of information via these platforms, not so much with traditional media like radio and television. And even, I wanted to tell you, for those of you, if you may implement FOPO, that we had a campaign over social media for auditing purposes because the government was not overseeing implementation. Because of this, the industry started reacting. They were increasingly harsher in their reaction. They threatened, they sent us photographs. We would talk about non-compliance. This is what social media allow you to do now. We have a communication way to do this without anyone determining what we may post or not. So we do have the decision to go in that direction. For those who start to implement this, we may have oversight and auditing a channel to expose those who are not complying, which bother the industry. On the other hand, those who are not moving towards FOPO, what you can do as well through social media is to show what would happen if this were enforced. Argentina somehow did it, and I think that Central America is trying to explore this path as well, because these are avenues that allow us to convey information. I think it's important by way of digital channels to give digested information to the population at large. For us to know about this, we read scientific evidence, we understand it, but we also need things to be simple for the population at large, because I think, and I'm going to go back to something that was a win in the tobacco case, we have to win regarding UPPs, which is the battle, the struggle regarding the consumption of this product and its outcomes. I think that no one can deny that tobacco makes people ill and kills them. What they doubt is to what extent UPPs make you ill as well. People, common people, if you tell them, oh, just one soda and some biscuits, well, that struggle was won with tobacco, not yet with UPPs. And this is part of the evidence and what you can use in regarding actions. Not only this, to what extent the food industry feels that they can go against activists because they know that they're not that are seen so bad by citizens. So digital media allow you to do this, and even protection for civil society. Our region has a lot of problems regarding advocating for human rights. So exposing cases with respect to society somehow generates protection. I think that they are very, very useful nowadays.
Gracias, Diego. Thank you, Diego.
Thank you, Diego.
So we just got a follow-up question from some of the comments that Diana did on the clarification that there are no formal legal challenges. I think just by seeing Diana's face, I can see she's reading the question. So do you want to respond to that? I can also help if you want.
I can say something, but probably you can complement.
Okay, yes, please go ahead, Diana. I think we didn't finish reading the question. So basically, there's, I mean, it's a long question,
right?
Yeah, it's a long question from Alice Silveira. but there's a reference to how some companies influence the position of different governments in World Trade Organization committees, like the TBT committee. And with a report particularly highlighting how Switzerland's opposition to Mexico FOPL was influenced by Nestlé. So the question is, to what extent do such trade-related interventions, particularly by European countries and Switzerland, delay, influence, or deter the adoption of FOPL policies in Latin America?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Juan, and Alice also for the question. I think this is a serious problem. Obviously, interference is all around. When we are working in these policies, we will face it in national law, in domestic law, and even stronger in international law. And particularly, this place of WTO is everyone has say this, and I'm not going to say something that is new if I say that it's an unbalanced place. It's a place where obviously global north countries have a stronger position to negotiate, and obviously industries from the global north can influence these countries, and through that way have a better place to for negotiation. So this is something that it has been said, and everyone knows it. But from our side, I think the point is try to denounce the situation and try to explain people what is actually happening behind this. And in two, at least in two sense. One sense is explaining the structure of the WTO and how decisions are made and how unbalanced is the place, but also how specifically these organizations, for example, in this case, Nestlé, through Switzerland or through certain governments, are actually working to interfere in a specific, in a particular policy. I think we, as advocates, we have to create tools. Again, it can be a book, but it can be also a video, it can be an interview, it can be, wherever you have in your disposal to explain this to the public, because people don't know it, because it's sometimes is difficult to understand and to communicate. But we have to face the challenge and denounce it finally.
Thank you, Diana. I don't know if there are other comments from the panelists. We are close to the finishing time, just in case. Yeah, but I think, one thing that I wanted to mention, I think it's another example. This is a very old one, but when Chile was actually discussing the labeling measure in Chile, they got many concerns. Many concerns were raised by different countries, including the USA, including European countries, at the TBT committee. It was the first one, so some of those concerns are no longer raised because there's a lot of evidence and information that has been developed that shows that this is a very cost-effective intervention. But I remember that one of the concerns came from Mexico, which at that time had passed the sugary tax beverages in Mexico. So it was a little bit surprising to many of us, seeing that a Latin American country that has already started advancing on these policies was objecting the possibility of another country to advance on this area. But it's basically also connects with what has been said and shared by the panelists, in the sense that these spaces are dominated by representatives that are closer to the industry and are more used to hear arguments that are related to economic issues, to trade issues. So while Mexico as a government was advancing on food policies, at the same time they were opposing the TBT committee, because the public officers and the authorities that were channeling the official position from Mexico in that space were mostly influenced by trade-related arguments, are probably closer to the industry. So I think this also relates to this latter question that Diana was addressing. I don't know if there are any quick comment that any of the panelists would like to make before closing.
I just very, very short to Alice's questions, and thank you for asking. I just wanted to say that it was useful to create doubt. It was useful to delay the process in Latin America, but at the end of the day, we clarified advocates, academia, public health government officials, we clarified what this actually was, and we were able to dismantle these arguments. So for the industry, it was useful to create this doubt. It was useful to delay, but at the end of the day, that was everything, right? So like, it's important to know the process. It's important to clarify it. And as Diana was saying, writing a book, writing an article, making an event, a public event where you clarify what this means. We did many of these activities in the different countries in Latin America to clarify all the arguments that the industry were posing. So at the end of the day, it was more about the comms campaign that we worked on to support the legal arguments than the legal responses themselves.
Thank you, Diane. I think we're very, very close to the finishing time. So I just wanted to take some seconds to first thank Dejucticia for joining GHI in this webinar. Thanking all the panelists for their participation in this online event, all the authors and editors of the book. I also wanted to thank the interpreter today, Danielle and Niola, and the webinars team at GHI, and Luki, who's been all over the place, and she's also a co-author of 2 chapters. So thank you so much for joining today. There are many, besides the book, there are many resources and many experiences on these issues that we hope can be helpful for others working on the same issues. So looking forward to finding new opportunities to collaborate and to exchange experiences. Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Gracias.